Hey guys, back in 1989 or 1990, while hiking high in the cliffs in the mountains east of Provo, Utah, I stumbled onto an ancient-looking set of hieroglyphs that was neatly and painstakingly carved onto a solid cliff wall. While trying to research and figure out what these hieroglyphs meant and who wrote them, led me on a wild adventure all across the western United States, filled with anywhere with death and deception on one side of the spectrum to the joy and amazement of being able to see and handle artifacts and hear stories that most people will never get to hear and see. I slowly learned that there was more of these scattered throughout the western United States, hidden in off-the-beaten-path obscure locations. The people that found these didn't know about all the other sites scattered throughout the western United States, and so what they figured with their site created unique stories and a unique history to the area. This is one history of Fillmore, Utah, of what some people thought these were, and about the tragedy that happened in this small town. So I hope you enjoy this story preserving the history of what went on in Fillmore, Utah. And if you like this, leave a comment, let me know your thoughts, and hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe if you're not a subscriber.
Jose Davila and the Ancient Records. Many interesting things could be written about Jose Davila. With all of the interesting things that have gone on in his life, he is a true adventurer. But as with all adventurers, he has had just as many heartbreaking bad experiences as he has had good. I will not try to write everything I could about Jose. Only bits and pieces of his involvement with the mysterious symbols in Fillmore, Utah. Jose is of Mayan descent and is a highly self-educated man with a photographic memory. His love for history and archaeology is the reason he spends all of his time and efforts in these areas. He spent many years as a tour guide of the ancient ruins in the Yucatan peninsula. When I interviewed him back in 1995, he was involved in the digs at Tulum, where he was looking for the haul of records that his ancestors kept, then hid in ancient times. In 1961, Jose acquired 5 out of 12 gold plates that were found in a tomb at Amusgas, Oaxaca, Mexico, by Dr. Jose Padilla. These gold plates, now known as the Padilla plates, had a strange writing on them, never been seen before by archaeologists. Jose spent 2 long years trying to crack the code to reading these hieroglyphs. With the help of Budge's dictionary on Egyptian symbols and other research materials, he finally cracked the code to interpreting the symbols written on the gold plates. Allgood owned a small rock shop in Fillmore, Utah. He was a talented man who could do the most amazing things with an old twisted piece of wood or pile of ordinary rocks. If he wasn't busy creating his works of art, he was in the hills looking for more rocks and trees to build his artwork with. It was during one of these excursions that he stumbled upon the mysterious symbol site in the hills above Fillmore, Utah. He wasn't the first to discover them, but he did take an unusual interest in them while trying to figure out their meaning. Del hung around the local gas station. He loved talking to the customers about the unusual symbols and the Spanish mines in the mountains above Fillmore. One day a man from Salt Lake City stopped by the gas station for a fill-up. As usual, Del started talking about the symbols and how they almost looked like Egyptian hieroglyphs. The man knew Jose Davila and his studies in reading Egyptian. He told Del that he knew a man who could probably interpret them for him. He told Del all about Jose and the gold plates. He told him that Jose was from Mexico but happened to be in Salt Lake, visiting friends. Del wasted no time in getting a hold of Jose. He described the symbols to Jose over the phone. Del agreed to pay for a round-trip bus ticket and money for meals if Jose would just come to Fillmore and take a look at the symbols. Jose agreed, arrangements were made, and bus tickets were purchased. Jose finally sees the symbols. When Jose arrived in Fillmore in September of 1964, Del and Harold Huntsman met Jose at the bus station. They headed for the symbols 4 miles east of Fillmore in Chalk Creek Canyon. They came to rest in front of a small cave. On top of the cave's entrance was an inscription of 25 characters. In Jose's own words he said, "A sober evaluation of these inscriptions led me to the conclusion that I was confronted by the first kind of ancient ideogrammic writing that had ever been found in petroglyphs in North America." 5 days later, Jose had translated a number of the symbols and was very excited about them. He says they talked about ancient sacred records deposited there, and they gave the instructions to retrieve them. The rest of that winter found Jose working on the translation of the symbols and surveying the area. When the snow finally melted, they started marking the area for the place the symbols said to dig. Jose figured the inscription said to draw a square area 100 cubits per side, and put intersecting diagonal lines to determine the center where they were supposed to dig. As they were marking one side of this area, they found a carved stone hand near one of the lines they just drew. They also found a rock with a drill hole in the middle of it. They didn't think anything of the drill hole and the hand, other than they felt it was intended to let the searcher know they were right in their interpretations of the measurements they got from the symbols. They proceeded to the center of the box they had just drawn, and started preparation to sink their shaft to the tunnels that housed the ancient records. During the rest of the summer of 1965, they proceeded to dig a 20-foot tunnel, and drilled over 600 feet of exploratory holes to find the ancient tunnels. Jose said it was an expensive summer. They spent over $1,000 for drilling, and over $1,000 for road work, tunneling, dynamite, food and fuel. Jose spent that summer living near the site in his camper. When the snow came, it forced him to stop. They had to wait until the following summer to start up again. The pre-trial. That summer Jose and his helpers put in an 80-foot shaft 20 feet wide. They felt they were close to breaking into the ancient tunnel, where the ancient records lay hidden. However, Jose said greedy eyes were watching their progress all the time, just waiting for the right moment to jump in and finish the job for themselves. At that moment, a film producer offered the owner of the mining claims $100,000 to step in and stop Jose before he broke into the chamber, so he could retrieve the ancient records. The film producer had approached Jose about making a documentary on the excavation and discovery of the ancient records. Jose didn't want the world to swoop down on this area until he had it fully explored. The producer felt this was too important not to let the world know. So the producer went around Jose and went straight to the owner of the mining claims, Harold Huntsman. He wrote up an earnest agreement and gave Huntsman $1 to bind the contract. Jose found out and filed a lawsuit in hopes to keep control of the area. A pre-trial broke out between Huntsman and Jose to determine if a court trial was warranted. With Jose losing at the pre-trial, a court order was issued for Jose to stop all work until after the trial. During the pre-trial they reached the 80-foot mark and mushroomed the hole out at the bottom of the shaft. Their plan was to drill some exploratory holes 360 degrees around the bottom of the shaft, hoping to locate the chamber which they felt they were near. The fateful day, November 6, 1966. On November 5th, Dwayne White and Kent Neely were working on the shaft. Jose was in the hospital with the ruptured appendix he got while running the air drill. Harold Huntsman showed up and ordered the men to stop work and to get off the property. The men told Huntsman they were working under Jose's orders and they were not leaving. Huntsman told them he would be back Monday morning with a court order and the sheriff to kick them off the property. Dwayne and Kent decided they better get in and get the ancient records out of the ancient tunnels before Monday. They drilled 3 20-foot holes at the bottom of the shaft. The next day, November 6, they loaded the holes up with 91 sticks of dynamite at 60%. The large boom from the blast echoed across the valley. It was a Sunday. Jose had always preached against working on the Sabbath, but they felt the situation warranted it. The blast went off at 4 p.m. 3 air hoses were dropped down the shaft, and the compressor was turned on full blast. Kent and Dwayne headed for town to eat while the fumes from the blast were clearing out. While eating, Kent's parents showed up. 2 hours after the blast, they all headed back up the mountain to the shaft. Kent went down first to see if they had broken into the chamber. When they didn't hear from him, Dwayne went down. Dwayne started yelling to pull him up, and as they did, he fell out of the 55-gallon drum he was lowered down in. Both of them had been overcome by the gases and lack of oxygen from the explosion. Kent's mother went to town for help, but the sheriff's posse had no way to retrieve the bodies. It was finally Allgood who retrieved them. That night Dal called Jose at the hospital and gave him the bad news. Jose arrives on site. In Jose's own words, he stated, "After Dal called me that night, I left immediately for the site and slept by it in my camper. The next morning when I took the cap off of the shaft, I could still smell the gases. I headed back into town and the posse came back with me. At noon I was lowered into the shaft, wearing an oxygen mask. I found the wall at the bottom still wearing the 3 drilled holes. All intact, undemolished. What had happened? How could this have been? I finally figured the explosion had to have gone backwards. Perhaps the boys did connect with the ancient chamber, and the blast went into the chamber along with all the pressure and monoxide gases. So that 15 hours later the gases were still jettisoning out from the chamber through the 3 drilled holes. The Bureau of Mines stepped in and closed the shaft. Shoring, platforming, mining cage elevators, ventilating systems, etc. were to be put in before I could proceed with the shaft. I never had money enough for food and fuel, let alone for these demands. I returned to Salt Lake City bringing the bodies of my friends. The funeral was held under the devastating news that Huntsman was suing me, and that I was barred from the premises by court order. The court battle. The trial was held in May of 1967. Jose's strategy was to claim that Huntsman had never filed any proof of mineralization. That the only reason Huntsman filed a claim at all was because of the symbols. Jose and Allgood had filed claims over the top of Huntsman's claims, and stated that they did all the proper paperwork with the assays and assessment work, and that Huntsman had done none of this. After everything was said and done, the judge finally handed down his verdict on August 10, 1967, with Jose losing the court battle. Huntsman was granted all the mining and mineral rights. Not only was Jose barred from the site, he was also ordered to pay $500 in court costs. Another fateful day, August 11, 1967. Harold Huntsman was ecstatic. Filing a claim on the symbols was finally going to pay off for him. He was already figuring out what he was going to do with the $100,000 the producer was going to be giving him for the mining claims. But that never happened, because just 24 hours after the judge handed down the verdict, the producer met his untimely death by the same circumstances as Dwayne and Kent. It was August 11, 1967. While working on his mining claim called the Ace in the Hole, not far from where Jose's shaft was, the producer was overcome by monoxide fumes and fell to his death. Lawrence Oliphant, who was waiting topside of the shaft, sensed something was wrong. So he went down and found Stanfield slumped over. He started to drag Stanfield out, but started to be overcome himself. Somehow Lawrence was able to make it out and down the mountain to get help. But to this day he still doesn't remember climbing back out of the shaft. It was now 3 deaths, 3 widows, and a whole bunch of fatherless children, and still no ancient records. The townspeople started whispering that maybe the site and the symbols were haunted. And so it was rumored that people who go looking for the hidden treasures connected with these symbols end up dead. There are more of these symbol sites around the western United States. To date I have tracked down and verified 35 such locations. There has also been some mysterious deaths related to some of the other symbol sites. One of which I was indirectly involved in, and will be another story I need tell someday. So maybe, there just may be something to the curse of these symbols. Jose said that those boys' deaths would not be in vain. In May of 1968 he struck up a deal with Huntsman. A contract was drawn up, and Jose was to start paying $10,000 a year for 10 years beginning in September of 1970. If Jose failed to find the mine, he was to leave enough work behind for the year's assessments on Harold's other 5 claims. Jose paid Huntsman $1,500 as a down payment. Work began again in June of 1968. Jose had given the last of his money to Huntsman, and never even had enough money left over for food. He lived off fruits that he got from Allgood's farm, and from watercress he picked along the ditch banks. Jose said that Mr. and Mrs. Neely may have lost their firstborn to this project, but they never lost faith in it. Mr. Neely let Jose use the air compressor and drill again, and he also bankrolled him $200. The Bureau of Mines would not let Jose do any more work on the shaft until he met their demands. Jose couldn't afford to meet their demands, so he went down the hill and dug a 135-foot tunnel, hoping to intersect the shaft. But somehow they missed the shaft. But Jose calculated that if they sunk another shaft at the end of their tunnel, they should be able to intersect the ancient tunnel. A 20-foot shaft was sunk inside their tunnel. The shaft was mushroomed out at the bottom, so that they could drill 30-foot exploratory holes to try and connect to the ancient tunnel. Finally, on Christmas Day of 1968, Jose made a last-ditch effort to find the tunnel. He probed and blasted, but never connected with the ancient tunnel. Jose comes to the sobering discovery of his miscalculations. That winter, Jose tried to figure how he had missed the ancient tunnel. He went over all his interpretations of the symbols, his measurements, etc. He couldn't find anything wrong. Finally, while studying an astronomical chart, he discovered that the North Star was in a different location, 1,550 years ago than it is today. Armed with this new evidence, he calculated that he was 5.30 degrees off from where he should have been. He figured he should have been digging where they found the carved stone hand back in 1965. He went back and figured a translation for the stone hand, and decided that the Egyptian meaning for the carved rock was to remove. During the summer of 1969, Jose scraped up enough money to repair the road up to the symbols, and on up to the stone hand, taking out some of the turns in the road, and making it wide enough to get a drilling rig up there. Summer came and went, and he was still no closer to retrieving the ancient records than when he first started back in 1964. Spending all his time and money on this project caused major problems in his family life. He was suffering from a lot of persecution, and was called an embarrassment to the Mormon Church. With no funds to pay Huntsman the $10,000 he owed him for the 1970 season, Jose headed back to Mexico with a broken spirit. He had tried diligently for 6 years to get to the ancient records, only to have all his hopes and dreams shattered. Conclusion: whether Jose was right in his deciphering of the symbols or not has been highly debated. Many people have tried deciphering them in many different ways, with most of them using the Egyptian hieroglyphic definitives and ideograms to try and solve the mystery. Letters I have in my possession between Jose and several noted Egyptologists state to Jose that they are not Egyptian, except for just a couple of the symbols. Egyptian is the closest thing that I know of that compares to these symbols. But if they are not Egyptian, what are they? While researching and studying Jose and these particular symbols, I have come to the conclusion, and believe that Jose 100% believed in his interpretation of the symbols. And he 100% believed that he would find an ancient tunnel with ancient records inside. Not only did Jose believe this, but also many years after their divorce, Jose's ex-wife and kids still believe that Jose was right in his deciphering of the symbols. Whether he was right or not we may never know. You decide and let me know what you think. While in Mexico, Jose was sent to prison for 4 years. Because he never registered 2 broken down cars with the Mexican government. He was supposed to drive them to the border every 6 months to re-register them. But because they were broke he couldn't get them there, as the border was a long way away. There were other charges of antiquity, and illegal contraband such as bank security cameras. But they were all dropped when Jose produced the proper paperwork. This all came about because of the Padilla gold plates. And there's still another long story that I need to tell sometime in the future. I think if Jose wouldn't have ended up in jail, he would have came back to Fillmore, Utah. And there would have been more to this saga, and also more about his little-known adventures near the Cedar City mystery glyph site, where he determined the panel was giving directions to where more ancient records were buried. Which is still yet another story that could be told about the adventures and heartaches of the real-life adventurer known as Jose Davila.